Hey guys, we're in Mark chapter 13, but if you remember back in Mark chapter 12, the beginning of it, Jesus told that parable about the vine dressers. It basically talked about how they had rejected God's messengers, the prophets, and killed a lot of them, and how they had rejected and killed John the Baptist. Now they're about to reject and kill God's son. And since Jesus has gotten to Jerusalem, he spoke a whole lot more plainly and bluntly about the sins of the nation and about the consequences. And what we're going to see in our chapter this morning, chapter 13, is that because of what they're about to do, God's going to reject and kill them. And he's going to destroy their temple. So let's pick up in verse 1. Then as he went out of the temple, one of the disciples said to him, "Teacher, see what manner of stones and what buildings are here." And Jesus answered and said to him, "Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone shall be left upon another that shall not be thrown down." Jesus had spent an entire day in the temple, getting questioned and teaching. And on his way out of the temple, him and his disciples, one of his disciples looked around and said, "Wow, look how beautiful the temple is." And that's because it was. It was more glamorous and more beautiful than Solomon's temple. And it was bigger too, because when Herod had rebuilt it, he expanded it. It became like 1/4 of the size of the city. And so it was huge. It was beautiful. It was absolutely amazing. And Jesus looks around at it and he says, "Oh yeah, that's nice. But you see these great buildings? Not one stone will be left upon another because it's going to be destroyed." Now, I know that's not what they expected Jesus to say. Could you imagine being a Jew from their perspective and somebody telling you that the temple is going to be destroyed? That was the epicenter of the Jewish religion. That was what you prayed towards because that's where you came into contact with God's presence and his forgiveness. It was a staple in their life. It was extremely important to them. And so I don't know if there's anything to compare it to, but maybe it's like being an American and going to Washington, D.C. and seeing all the monuments and the government buildings and saying, "Wow, look how beautiful they are." And somebody saying, "Yeah, that's nice," but they're going to be leveled to the ground because they're going to be destroyed. I mean, this is earth-shattering to these people. And so pick up in verse 3 because they have a few questions. It says, "Now as he sat on the Mount of Olives, opposite of the temple, Peter, James, John, and Andrew asked him privately, 'Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign when these things will be fulfilled?'" So they come out of the city, down through the Kidron Valley, up into the Mount of Olives. And they sit there where they could just kind of look over the Kidron Valley and they could see the temple. And the disciples have a couple questions. If you think about it from a first century Jewish perspective, the temple is going to be destroyed. So that must be the end of all things. That's going to be the end times. And we know that that's simply not true. That's not what Jesus is saying here. But their questions kind of reflect that. And so their questions are basically two: when and what. And Jesus is going to tell them what in this teaching. But the when we know historically. About 40 years after Jesus says these things, around 70 AD, Titus, a Roman emperor, will invade Jerusalem and destroy the temple. And so that all kind of matches up what Jesus will say later on in the teaching of verse 30. "Surely I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all these things take place." Everything that we read in this text is going to take place from that point back. It's going to take place within 40 years span. And I know that there's going to be a transition in verse 32 where he's going to talk about a different judgment. But here he's talking about the judgment of Israel. Jesus is going to continue to tell them some things that's going to take place from the time he says this around 33 AD to about 70 AD, like wars and rumor wars and famines and earthquakes and those kinds of things. And those are just things going to take place during that period of time. They need to prepare their hearts for those kinds of things.